My name is Ryley, and you are listening to the Ryley Heppner podcast. Well, for those that don't know, Tim, you do a lot of different things. On top of being an elder at your church, you're a longtime blogger and one with a very wide audience these days. I would love to know just when did you start writing? How did you end up blogging? And how did blogging turn into books for you?
Yeah. I guess I started writing around 2002, I think is when I registered Challies.com.
Okay.
You have to remember this was pre-social media.
Yeah.
There was no social media, no Facebook, those sorts of things. And so I started Challies.com as a kind of a family portal was the idea, hence the last name. Um, and I just started sharing pictures of my kids. My family had moved to the States, so I just thought it'd be a good place to share some pictures of the kids for my family. And remember, digital cameras were a brand new thing there, or
Yeah.
else you'd be taking them on film still and
The
scanning them the
tiny
best you
little
could.
screen.
Yeah, exactly. And so I shared some photos, and but along the way, I started doing a little bit of writing, just stuff I thought was interesting to me, and maybe would be interesting to my family. And then search engines, which were also brand new back in the day, started picking up on it, and other people started reading it. And it sort of just grew out from there. This was I'd grown up in Reformed churches, but
Okay.
had then left the Reformed tradition for a more mainline Baptist kind of church. And this was right around the time then that the new Calvinism was coming into its own or developing. And so I started writing about that, sort of writing my way back into Reformed theology.
Oh,
And a
interesting.
lot of other people were thinking about these things at the same time. So I think that's where it just became one of the voices of this new movement.
So you weren't really writing as I don't know, a kid, a high schooler. It just kind of started
No,
with the
I mean, I
blogging.
did a little bit, but not so much. It was, I did a lot of writing in high school and university,
Okay.
but then really just stopped. I didn't do anything after that until I started blogging, at
So you
least that
had
I recall.
pre-blog, you hadn't identified necessarily in yourself like a gift for writing.
No, I had
Okay.
done okay at it when I was younger, and there's quite a few writers in my family, so it's something we
Okay.
seem to be naturally able. We're definitely not mathematicians, that kind of thing. We're
Okay.
not scientists, but we can write. And so I had some, I'd say, natural gifting there,
Okay.
but it wasn't something I'd expressed. I
Okay.
was actually working in the computer world at that time. I was doing network administration.
Okay.
So I approached blogging somewhat as a technological idea more than a writing idea.
Okay. And how did blogging eventually turn into books for you?
So I guess it was around, I don't know, it might have been 2007 or something. A publisher just approached me and said, "Hey, would you like to write a book?" And at that time, blogging was sort of becoming the minor leagues for writing.
Okay.
And so publishers would keep an eye on who was blogging, who could prove they had an audience, or who could prove they would write in such a way that other people would read it. And then they started plucking bloggers out of that. That sounds very natural to us today. It was brand new at the time.
Okay.
They would start plucking bloggers and just saying, "Hey, would you like to write a book?" And so that's where the first one came from. It was a book on spiritual discernment. And after I wrote that one, and I guess a few people read it, then publishers were willing to have me write more. And so those are in my world, there's some overlap between them. Some of the books I've written came out of blogging. So I sort of
Okay.
blogged my way through some ideas and write a book about it. Others were completely disconnected from it,
Did
just
those
a
seem like two
very
different
different
worlds for
subject.
you in terms of just because you were blogging, did you feel up for the task of writing a book? Or was it intimidating
Uh,
still?
No, it's still intimidating, and they are very different things. Blogging, you can write 500 words and you'll have a million people read it. I did that once with an article on why my family doesn't do sleepovers.
Okay.
I spent about half an hour writing a short article and it just went kaboom. Whereas with books, you've got to just do a whole lot more work. You've got
Yeah.
to, really bear down with thoughts that would extend through tens of thousands of words. And so they're different and wonderfully so, but there isn't a ton of overlap between them often.
Okay. Well, I mean, a significant accomplishment. You've been consistently blogging for what now would be, I think, almost 8,000 days. That's,
Yeah, I haven't looked for a while.
yeah, I think last week when we were going to chat, it was, you were at like 7,690 or
Okay.
something like that. I mean, I look at that and just think that's an incredible amount of discipline. I'd be curious, where did that goal? and even the discipline to achieve it. I mean, every day
Mhm.
for that many days. Where did that come from? Was it an ambition to blog daily as a response to maybe seeing a lack of discipline in your
You got it.
life?
Yep. That was
Or-
exactly it. I had
Okay.
started this blog and I would be like so many other people. Most of my blog posts would be explaining why I hadn't written for so long and apologizing and I'm going to do better. Um, and I just got tired of doing that. So I decided, I think this was back in 2004, 2003. I said, I'm going to blog every day for a year. And if I don't, I'm just going to quit because I'm
Okay.
frustrating myself with my inability to do it, leaving a gap of a week and then a gap of a month. And so I said, I'll do something every day for a year. And I did. At the end of that year, I had written every day. And I thought, well, that was all right. I could do that again. So I
Yeah.
re-upped it for another year. And by the
Okay.
time that second or third year was done, it would just sort of become a thing. And I had gotten into the discipline of posting something every day. And I should distinguish between writing every day and posting every day.
Okay.
I don't write every day, but I do post every day. So I'll go away for 2 weeks at a time and I won't look at anything. Everything will have been set up in advance and programmatically post itself, etc. So I do take time off. I'm not a complete addict to work.
Okay. I mean, now you have people with this expectation too that there's something from Tim every day. In terms
Yeah.
of after 8,000 days, I mean, the discipline is clear now and hopefully is clear to you that like you can do this. Do you keep going now every day on a principle for yourself or because of the expectation for other people? Or would you be willing now to miss a day, or does that kind of wash everything away that you've kind of
Yeah,
built
I'm
here?
going to keep it going for the time being, Lord willing. I think if there was a compelling reason to take a break, I actually thought of taking a break at whatever Cal Ripken played X number of games in a row without missing one. I thought it would be fun to do one less than Cal Ripken and then take a day off. But then I totally forgot about that a few days out, so I didn't end
Okay.
up doing it. But yeah, now I'm just kind of stuck with it. It's become my thing, and
Yeah.
I'm fine with it. It wouldn't break my heart if I missed a day. I would just take the counter off the bottom of the site. That counter's
Yeah.
been there in its exact form, just a tiny little PHP script. It's been there since 2003,
Oh, wow.
I believe.
Something
And
you
it's just been
programmed, I
counting.
imagine.
I think so. I
Okay.
think so. I just asked somebody to scratch it up. It's very short. It just starts with a certain day and then just increments one every day,
Okay.
but it's been there ever since. And yeah, I don't think it would break my heart to take it off, but it is just kind of a gimmicky thing that I do now, and
Yeah. It
it's
might
kind of
break
fun.
some other people's hearts. I feel like there might be some kind of you know,
Maybe.
it'd be a bit noisy if all of a sudden it stopped. People would be
Yeah, my mom would definitely call to make sure everything's okay.
okay. Yeah, I
And the
would
funny thing is, I mean, I've got a daughter who's 18. I
okay.
started this before she was born. I've
Wow.
got a daughter and I mean, that daughter, I announced her birth as part of this streak, and now she's 18. My other daughter is 21 now, and I started it because she was a baby, and I wanted to share pictures of her. That's when I started
Okay.
the site, and then started writing. So, yeah, it's just become part of my life for 20 years now.
Has it overflowed into other parts of your life now? That I mean, now that you've created that amount of discipline there, is it I don't know, do you can you take that now and like that gave you a new confidence to find other areas of discipline in your life?
Uh, I think to some degree it required a lot of discipline to do, and that was especially true when I had another full-time job. First, I was full-time in network administration, and then
Okay.
full-time associate pastor at a church. And so the blogging was always the second thing. It
Okay.
was more of a hobby. There came a time when I realized that I think the revenue streams are sufficient now that I could let go of those other jobs and do this on a full-time basis and do the others
Okay.
part-time. And that required a bit of a leap of faith. And yeah, I think in the end it was a good decision to do it that way. And so at the time I was full time at my church and basically full time blogging. Out of that came a book called Do More Better, which is Do More Better. I happen to have a
Okay.
copy of it right here. That was about productivity, and a lot of the thoughts on that were just me trying to organize my life enough to be able to do both these things
Okay.
and applying principles and developing a Christian theology of productivity. And yeah, at that time, that's where I rotated off staff. I became a um, non-vocational elder and
Okay.
took up writing full time.
Well, in a world of video content too, I mean, a lot has changed since 2003 when you began, when everyone had a blog, and now it would seem everyone has a YouTube channel. Uh,
Or a
I mean, how
podcast or a
important?
Substack.
Yeah, or subs those things do.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Substack's kind of the new blogging
Yeah.
piece, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
because everybody tried video, and it's very difficult compared to writing in terms of the
sure.
barriers to entry, the difficulty of production, and just the difficulty in getting it from amateurish to professional can be
Yeah,
very time consuming and costly, etc. And everybody tried podcasting as well. But I think the problem with both video and podcasting is they're much harder to monetize.
sure.
And so people would do it and there'd be very little benefit to them. And
Yeah,
similar to blogging, the market got flooded. The first people in saw the great majority of the views, listens, etc.
yeah.
And a lot of others had trouble catching up. And so Substack came along. It offers a built-in revenue model that's very, I think, quite good, quite successful,
Okay.
and a low barrier to entry. And so a lot of people have jumped on that. But some of us have been
Oh,
steady Eddie and
interesting.
just kind of stuck with one thing this whole time.
Yeah, I'll have to. I know a few people got into Substack, but I haven't looked at it enough to. I didn't know there was a revenue piece to it, and I'll have to check
Mhm,
that
yeah,
out
they
more.
they offer subscriptions built right into their model.
Okay.
And so a lot of people then can monetize to some degree.
Yeah.
Where blogging, the monetization was generally either through banner ads or through affiliate programs. That's
Okay.
if you want to know why you're always seeing Amazon links on blogs, it's because Amazon helps people monetize their sites.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think blogging offered it was easy in blogging to make a little bit of money,
Okay.
easier than it was through YouTube or podcasting.
Okay. Well, sticking with that, the written content, I wonder how important do you think writing is in, I don't know, in ministry and church context? Like at some point you were pastoring and writing. Did you feel
Mhm.
that was an important and effective piece to your ministry? And obviously not everyone's a writer, but I guess out of that, how important do you think writing is or can be for the average pastor?
I don't think it's necessary. The Bible doesn't say anything about it as being a qualification or anything like that.
Yeah, able to
However,
write.
yeah, I think it is, it's a form of self-expression. It helps you develop ideas. And,
Okay.
I think a lot of people manuscript their sermons because there's a certain precision of thought and precision of expression that come through writing them down. Even if you later tear up your manuscript or however you choose to preach, I think there is a lot of value in writing. And personally, I'm not very good at holding a lot of thoughts in my head.
Okay.
So I don't really know what I think or what I believe or what my convictions are until I write them down.
Yeah.
And that it's in that process of writing that they become sharper and that I can challenge myself. I can have that sort of inner dialogue about, do I really believe this? Is this really true? How can I say that better? How can I say that with more precision? So
Yeah.
certainly for me, it's an extremely important discipline and one that's really a spiritual discipline. It's my form of meditation.
Okay.
So when I'm out in the morning, I usually go for a walk and listen to the Bible for a while. Then, it's thoughts that from the Bible, I'm jotting them down as I go because I want to come back to that. Think about it. No, I'll probably write about it because that's how I do my thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always similarly, I've always thought for me that writing is thinking, and it has gotten me into trouble before in with my wife, just in that she read something online. She's like, "You never even told me that." I'm like, I never even realized I only thought that as I wrote it.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. My
yeah,
wife doesn't read my site really. It's not really her jam. So we don't
okay.
run into that very
Well, my
often.
wife does not listen to my podcast.
Great. Yeah.
So,
It's not a
similar.
requirement.
Yeah, for sure. Well, in 2018, you wrote this book, "Run to Win: The Lifelong Pursuits of a
Yeah.
Godly Man." What were some of the significant moments, if you can remember, that led up to this one? I mean, were there observations you were making that gave you the motivation to write it? Maybe seeing some
Mhm.
consistent struggles in your life or in the lives of men that weren't being addressed?
Yeah, the second book I ever wrote was a book about pornography, and
Okay.
it was called Sexual Detox: A Guide for Guys Who Are Sick of Porn. And that book came out of my conversations with men, with young men especially, and this sense of alarm I had when I found out just how immersed young men were in pornography. And so I started writing that book for them. And this was back in the day before there were a lot of resources for porn. Today we've got so many good ones that
Sure.
that book would be redundant. But in the day, there was very, very little. And so I wrote that for young men. And that sort of got me thinking about issues related to men. And I spent more time speaking to young men. And Run to Win grew out of that. It's not just for
Okay.
young men, but it's for men in general, and just uses that biblical metaphor of the race, the one that was so important to the Apostle Paul, especially. The fact that each of us is running a race, and it's our task, it's our calling from God to run in such a way that we win that race, that we come to the end and um, hear those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Yeah.
I mean, 2018 is not that long ago, but how do you think the landscape for men has changed from then to now? And I guess have you felt encouraged looking at that landscape since that book came out? Not that your book was necessarily like the thing that changed the culture, but I'm
No.
sure it was a drop in the bucket. But you think,
Mhm.
do you see generally men taking more seriously this call to uh, godliness, or the other way, or do you see
Yeah.
more temptations growing?
I'd say, I mean, probably a bit of both, a bit from
Yeah,
column A, a bit from column B. The things have changed a little bit. So when I wrote that book, I think the context would have still been maybe the Mark Driscoll era
sure.
of, his way of speaking to men and speaking about manhood. There was still a little bit of that, I don't know, silly machismo kind of stuff that I just think is, yeah, it doesn't reflect the who we see in the Lord Jesus Christ as the
Hmm.
ultimate example of masculinity or manhood. Today, things have changed a little bit, I suppose. I think more men have a better grip on pornography, at least in the Christian world, and the evils of pornography and so on. But there's certainly challenges. I see a new wave of silly versions of manhood. Kind of metrosexual era has
Yep.
probably come to an end. The people that Driscoll was so often scolding, but now it's maybe course corrected a little bit, or it's sort of overcorrected a little bit. And I know Stoicism is on the rise amongst men, just trying sort of blending Christianity and Stoicism
Oh,
a little bit.
interesting.
So I think there's always challenges.
Okay. That I haven't uh seen. What are like examples of that increasing?
Yeah, I think it's just this idea that men should be impassive and
Okay.
unflustered and unemotional and that kind of thing. There's maybe I mean, it's probably a caricatured view of Stoicism as well, but just trying to draw back. And people are looking, I think, for ancient moorings. And
Okay.
if you don't find it in Christ, if you don't find it in Scripture, you'll find it elsewhere. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, we've seen some interest in that of all things.
Well, in the book, you list 17 different disciplines that are biblical and essential to running the race well, to becoming a godly man. And I think you put all 17 of those under the banner, kind of self-control. I wonder, how would you define self-control in the Christian life, and why did you see it? Do you still see it as such a vital aspect of spiritual maturity for, I mean, for men and women, but for men in this book?
Yeah, yeah. Well, self-control is it's something we can force through just our own sheer effort. So we can be legalistically self-controlled. And many people do that. And Stoics would do that, right? They would enforce rigid self-discipline, but they do it for the wrong motives and through the wrong means. Self-control, as I understand it, is fruit of the Spirit, and so it's a result of the Holy Spirit living within, the Holy Spirit sanctifying you, making you more like Christ. And then the fruit, the result of dwelling in Christ, the result of your salvation ought to be self-control, which is a form of restraint, a godly restraint from those things that God forbids. And of course, the far side of it would be a godly desire to do those things that God commands, to be successful in those ways that are so precious to God.
Do you think self-control is any more difficult now than it's been before? I mean, not even 2018, but maybe even farther than that. Do you think, even from the ancient world, do you think there's any
Yeah.
more need for self-control now than at another age?
Yeah, I doubt it. I
Okay.
think we tend to think that our age is unique and that there's specific challenges we have that nobody's ever had to face before. And I'm sure
Yeah.
there's some of that. But I mean, you just have to read the early chapters of Proverbs, and there's a father pleading with a young man to avoid going in the way of the wily woman, etc. And all the things he says could apply as easily to a man on the street with a prostitute at the door, or a man on his computer with porn sites beckoning
Yeah.
and calling him. So I think this is a universal challenge. Every human being has had to face it. And yeah, every human being, every man needs to be prepared for the battle of self-control, to be a
Yeah.
man who exercises control over his passions, over his desires, and then over all the expressions of them.
Well, sometimes with regard to self-control, I think maybe we can be motivated to consider it in the big things and ignore it in the small things. Like say we practice it at the gym and we're very disciplined there, but then we go home and when it comes to snacks and TV, we kind
Yep.
of let it go out the window. You talked about this a bit in the book, but I just wonder how does self-control in all of the small daily decisions contribute to a long-term spiritual growth and perseverance?
One of the things I have this vivid memory of, maybe it was 15 years ago now or something, realizing if I drank two Cokes a day rather than one Coke a day, other things in my life would start to fall apart. I don't drink any Coke today. I'm too old for that. But back in that day, I would have one. I was young, my body could deal with it. Everything was still working the way it should. And, but if I had two, it would be a sign that I had sort of broached this internal rule I had for myself. And then other things would start to crumble, whether that would be a wandering mind or laziness or something else. And so I think self-control tends to stand or fall altogether.
Okay.
If you're self-controlled in one area of life, you're probably being self-controlled in other areas of life. And so that's why watching way too much TV and eating way too many chips and drinking way too much Coke, because those things probably all go together because you've
Okay.
relaxed self-control overall. I mean, not universally true, but I would say generally true.
Yeah.
And so I just realized if I'm drinking multiple Cokes a day, then probably my life is getting a little out of whack. So it was just one of those little measures I put in place to as just kind of a flag, a warning sign in my life. So yours may not be Coke, but I think all of us have these little things as we gain self-knowledge, these little things we ought to be aware of and looking for. It might be, again, the way you use your time or where your eyes wander or those sorts of things. And you see those things, and right away you think, okay, I'm challenged. I need to be challenged right now to regain that self-control, because this is self-control is a virtue we put on, and God truly sanctifies us in that way. But we won't ever be fully self-controlled until we're in heaven. And
Sure.
so it will
Yep.
be a constant battle for all of our lives. It's just as we age, it'll change, I think. What didn't interest us when we were young might be very compelling when we're old, and vice versa.
What do you say to men who don't have even the motivation to pursue self-control? Like, where do you start when you maybe don't even have a willingness, let alone confidence in the ability to pursue self-control when life, I don't know, maybe just feels so out of whack and messy?
I think our normal way of thinking is to do these things for ourselves. I want to be self-controlled because it's the right thing to do, or
Hmm.
something like that. But I think we need to shift our thoughts higher than that and think first, self-control is a way I can honor God, or a lack of self-control is a way I can displease God. And I would rather honor him than displease him. And so I know God is glorified when I exhibit self-control, when I refrain from sin and I pursue what is good and glorious to him. The other thing is put on self-control for the sake of the people in your life. Your wife, your children, your fellow church members, etc. The less self-control you have, the less good, the less value you are to them. And so I think that this is true in many areas of life. We fight for sanctification on the personal level. Of course
Hmm.
we do. But the best fight comes when we're really elevating our gaze into the ways I can love and serve others through these virtues and through avoiding these vices. So that's been a big paradigm shift in my life, is sanctification as a blessing to other people, not just as a
Yeah.
personal challenge, but I love my wife better when I grow in self-control. This way I can
Yeah.
serve and love her.
This is maybe just semantics, but do you, because we already talked about discipline with the blogging, especially, is there a difference between self-control and self-discipline? Or like you blogging 8,000 days, is that an example of self-control?
I mean, there's probably a bit of a difference between them, I would think. Yeah, it probably is a bit of a semantic difference, but yeah, I think maybe it's this way, just putting disciplines in place that are valuable to you.
Okay.
And so somebody else may not need any discipline of blogging every day. That might just be completely redundant for them or
Yeah,
completely meaningless. But for
sure.
me, it was meaningful. And again, the Coke example is a silly one, but for me, it was meaningful.
Yeah.
It really did make a difference to me. When I restrained that area, I found I was more naturally restrained in others. So again, a little self-knowledge, knowing what it is for you that is your trigger, your warning flag,
Yeah.
whatever it is, and then just being as careful as you can to abide by those rules, knowing that these aren't rules that make God love us more or anything like that.
Yeah.
These are just rules we put in place so that we can have that self-awareness, or we can keep ourselves from falling too far into sin.
Well, you title chapter three simply "Know Your Doctrine." Why, along with self-control, but again, all these I think fall under the banner of self-control. Excuse me. Why do you think a firm grasp of doctrine is essential for running the race of faith for Christians? I mean, how do you think the male population is even doing at that one, and why is it
Yeah.
essential to them
Well, we
succeeding
can
in life?
only obey God insofar as we know God, right? We can't obey a God we don't know. And doctrine is simply knowledge of God, right? Theology, knowledge of God. It's the things that God says are true of him. And so we need to know God in order to follow or obey God. And so if your obedience is lacking, you're lacking in self-control, you're lacking in other virtues. The solution may not be so much to bear down on that sin. It could be, but the path to success over that sin might be coming to know God better and understand God better. Understand what God says about marriage. That will help you in your battle for purity,
Hmm.
because you'll see the sheer horror of what it is to poorly reflect Christ in your relationship to your wife. And so, putting in that effort to understand who God has revealed himself to be, I think pays unexpected dividends across your life.
How do you, I mean, this is a very generalization again, but like, yeah, how do you think we're doing at that? Do you feel encouraged when you look at the church and men and doctrine?
Sure, yeah, I think so. I think, I dwell in just one small corner of the Christian world, as do
Hmm.
most of us. But from what I see of my little Christian subculture, whatever it is, I think it's quite theologically minded. So in the
Okay.
area of doctrine, I think people are doing pretty well. That said, I think any tradition fights to maintain the basics. And so, um, doctrine that was once important and really enjoyable, I think can become, uh, I guess it can just become kind of old to us, and we
Okay.
lose the wonder of it, and maybe eventually just lose even our articulation of it. So, me coming from the Reformed tradition, I think the what we call the 5 points of Calvinism, or the thing essentials like that, the five solas. I think we need to keep going back to those and making sure we understand them and are celebrating them, and letting them work their way out in our lives, because they really are the essential core doctrines to our expression of the faith.
What role do you think the local church plays now in helping believers deepen that doctrine? Uh, and is it possible that sometimes we expect too much of the church in terms of taking us deeper in doctrine and don't take enough responsibility for ourselves?
Yeah, probably. The church is not the church has responsibilities in the Christian life, but the church can only give Christians as much as they're willing to accept, if
Sure.
you will. Most churches lay out this program, on a week to week or year to year basis. Here's what this church offers. Of course, Sunday morning gatherings and prayer meetings and classes and all of that. But you can't force people to take those. And
Yeah.
so Christians will, I mean, it's a reality of the Christian life. Any of us is only as sanctified as we want to be, right?
Yeah, that's
Nobody,
a good way of saying it.
yeah, nobody ever forces us to sin. We only ever sin because we choose not to take hold of the grace of the Holy Spirit in that moment. We
Hmm.
choose to go our own way instead of taking what he's offering us right then, right there, the solution to that sin. And so, yeah, the church can do all it wants, but unless men are willing to say, no, I'm going to take advantage of these programs, I'm going to learn these things, read some books or read books on my own or read books with other men, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the church has some responsibility, but at the end of the day, each of us is an individual, and we make our own decisions.
That's a wonderful point. I mean, that's a powerful point that we're only as sanctified, as we want to be. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, nobody's holding you back but yourself,
yeah.
right? I mean, the life circumstances can be difficult, of course. I don't
Sure.
want to take away from that. But
Yep.
if you live with a very hard person in your life, that is just a training ground to love people better, right?
Yeah.
There's to become more like Christ, who knows what it is to suffer at the hands of other people. And so, I don't want to be trite about it, but God's got this universe organized well. He's got
Mhm.
each of us in the circumstances he means for us to be in, and He's arranged the circumstances so we can become like him. The question is, will we?
Yeah. Well, that's a good sermon or book right there. Yeah. I feel like yeah, that's a convicting thought. I think we can often, you know, uh, kind of shell out the our sin to attacks of this sort or that sort, but to
Yeah.
remember the personal responsibility that we have to, not that we don't have the Spirit strengthening us to work through these things, but there's a
Mhm.
personal choice and responsibility there.
Yep.
Are there particular theologians or books on doctrine that have had a significant impact on your own faith journey? Guys that you did read,
Uh,
still read that?
yeah, I think R.C. Sproul was huge
Oh,
in
yeah.
my early years of theological development. I just really resonated with his way of expressing truths and found him very warm and winsome and compelling. So he was big. Jerry Bridges was really big on that,
Okay.
the intersection between theology and practical living. So my interest has always been more in practical Christian living. So let's
Okay.
take that theology and let's apply it now to daily life. And so I've read a lot of people who live in that world as well. J.R. Miller's an old author who lived in the early 1900s, late 1800s. Very important to me. Again,
Okay.
taking those truths and now bringing them to bear in life. A lot of Puritan authors and so on.
Oh, yeah. Well, chapter 16 you call treasure your marriage. Can you also define that, kind of what you mean by that? What does it mean to treasure your marriage? And how is that distinct from simply maintaining your marriage?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. Well, to treasure your marriage is to understand that God has given you a responsibility toward this woman who is your wife. And the responsibility is not just grit out the years that God has given you, but to treasure them, to embrace them. And again, acknowledging some people have very hard marriages to very hard people. The fact is, God calls us to be like Christ toward his church in our marriages. And each of us can do that. God can give us the grace to do that. And so treasuring marriage is essentially treasuring your wife and living in a sense of wonder that God saw fit to give somebody to you and give you to somebody, that God saw fit to bind your life to somebody else for these years. And then to be grateful for that and to be a faithful steward of that, knowing that God will expect each one of us to give an account. What have you
Yeah.
done? How did you care for that woman created in my image, dearly loved by me? I gave her to you as your wife. What have you done? How have you served me by serving her?
Are there practical ways that you have found in your life and marriage? I mean, you're a busy guy for how you balance the demands of life, work, ministry, and still prioritize that relationship, the treasuring of that relationship.
Yeah, sure. I mean, everyone's marriage is so different. So I found as time goes on, there's less value in prescribing.
Okay.
Here's what you ought to do because my wife is unique and I'm unique and our relationship is unique. There's not another one that's quite like it. So what might be effective for us might not be effective for you. Some people thrive on date nights. I mean, that really is the core of their relationship to one another. Other people see no need for them and they've got other ways of relating and that's fine. So I think the call is to understand your wife, to understand the dynamic between the two of you, and to find ways of treasuring her, making her know that she's well loved. And as much as anything, I think it's letting your wife know that you're pleased with her rather than displeased. Because so many women, and I mean men too, live
Yeah.
with this sense that their spouse is just low grade disappointed in them, that they can
Hmm.
never be husband enough, wife enough to be pleasing. And I think trying to dispel that and just truly finding joy and delight in your spouse is huge. And then I don't know. My wife and I have been married 26 years now, so I'd like to think we've learned a few things along the way. And one
Yeah.
thing we talk about a lot and has been on our minds a lot is just um, realizing that your spouse will never be all you want your spouse to be, because they're not Jesus and they're a broken, fallible, messed up, sinful person too. And so enjoying your spouse without expecting your spouse to be perfect or without
Yeah.
expecting that person to perfectly fulfill you, I think is so healthy. Just yeah, understanding that this person is as broken and messed up and simple as you are is very helpful.
How do you think the church can help support, equip married couples to thrive in their marriages, to treasure their marriage?
I think every church should have, it should be the main training ground for marriage. So,
Yeah.
as much as it's valuable to read books on marriage, you've got a lot of books on marriage in your local church. And there
Hmm.
are couples who've been married for a long time and have endured lots of difficulties and still love one another and are still serving the Lord. So, for every book you read, I would say, arrange one or two lunch meetings with people like that and just get around them and say, we want our marriage to be like your marriage. How can that happen? What are some of the things you've learned along the way? Or tell us how you resolve disputes, or tell us how you can still love each other after all this time.
Yeah.
And I would really appeal to people. There's a strange thing that happens in the Christian world where people who are bad at something but want to be seen to be good in something will write about it. So I would, I don't know this for a fact. Well, maybe I do. Some of the books written about parenting are
Hmm.
by people you should not be modeling yourself
Yeah.
after as a
Fair
parent. Some of the
enough.
books on marriage are by people who have a rotten marriage, but it, they really want to have a good marriage or they want to be known for having a good marriage. And so
Hmm.
they write a book on marriage. In your own local church, fakery is much more difficult. You get to know people and see people. And so you can tell actually they don't have a good marriage, or actually these ones do have a good marriage. And yeah, so I think that's your training ground right there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is maybe a good question for you. You just said that like sometimes you're almost writing it for yourself. Uh,
Mhm.
how is writing Run to Win challenged or deepened your own faith journey?
Yeah, I think the main thing was wanting to win. And so
Okay.
when you think about the finish line and you ponder who you want to be when you break the tape and go to be with Jesus, you get a vision of yourself and then you work backward from there. And so, I want to be the kind of man who dies with my children loving me and
Hmm.
really honoring me. Okay. That now means I have to live a certain kind of life. I need to avoid certain behaviors. I can't be the guy who has an affair. My girls won't um, respect me at the end of my life if I
Hmm.
forsake their mother. Okay, so there, that now helps me understand the kind of life I need to live. Or I want my girls to know um, what a good marriage looks like.
Hmm.
And so I need to then have a good marriage to the best of my ability so that they can see that and then imitate that. So the big call and run to win is to go to the end of your race, determine who you want to be, and then work backward from there to who you are today. And who you are today is a very good predictor of who you will be at the end of your life, unless you really um, unless you're really convicted by God and really start making some changes in your life, you're not going to be a different person. Just old age by itself is not going to make you into a different
Sure.
person. This requires taking hold of the promises of God and just really living out the truths of the gospel day by day.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, Tim, thanks for the chat and thank you for the book. I mean, 2018 was a while ago, but it feels kind of just like yesterday. But the amount of books
Yeah.
that come out between 2018 and now is incredible. Uh, but I've found this to be such an impactful book in my life that I hope and pray it stands the test of time. And in one effort to make that happen, our little men's group is we're just finishing right now. Waiting isn't a waste by
Okay, great.
Marford Gope,
Cool.
and then we're gonna go
Yeah.
Run to Win and go
Okay,
through
great.
this because yeah, I mean I mean we go through books that I have personally found effective and think that this could be helpful to our group, and that was definitely the case with Running to Win.
Well, great. Good. I hope it proves useful.
And your latest book is it A Pilgrim's Prayer?
It's called
Prayer for
Pilgrim Prayers. Yep.
Pilgrim Prayers. Okay.
Yep.
Well,
You
looking
got it.
forward to reading that one too, and then
Good.
maybe can pick your brain on that one at some point. But I appreciate your time. Thanks for
Sounds great.
the
Yeah,
chat,
thank you.
Tim.